Coaching in Session.
Your exclusive destination for unparalleled personal and professional growth.
With your host, Michael Rearden.
Whether you choose to live within limits or break free, your mindset journey begins here.
Welcome, Jessica Decaillon to Coaching in Session. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. Today we're going to be talking about your work. You're the founder of WonderSpark Learning. It is going to be an online learning platform for children. And if anyone knows me, education is near and dear to my heart. I have been a teacher for several years before transitioning into coaching. And it is something that I know we have to invest in. It's not just the system of education, but parents as well. So we're going to be looking at your work. But before we do all of that, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and of course, how you help people?
Hi, so I'm the owner of WonderSpark Learning. I'm Jessica. So nice to meet your audience. We teach STEM, mathematics, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese. I started as just one woman operation, and now we have 9 teachers. I'm very fortunate to have awesome teachers working on my team, and we continue to serve. And so far, we have taught over 1,000 students, and hopefully the number is still rolling and growing.
What made you want to start the business? Was there a lack of education for children? Was there some gaps in a child's learning? Or was it just something that was your passion that you wanted to be a part of?
So I love that you jumped straight to a very important question. And I think this question, so my journey to become teachers are very windy. I was a web analyst at a marketing firm, and then I started homeschooling my own daughter. And then through that journey, I discovered that I really enjoy teaching. And I was looking more and more into education in general, public education, private education. And I think there is a gap to fill and to serve the students that might need extra help, whether they're in public school or they are in homeschooling like my family.
What was the gap that you saw that was most pronounced when your daughter was in homeschooling versus looking at someone who's in public schooling?
So what's the biggest difference between homeschooling and public school?
Or the biggest gap that you saw? For example, maybe homeschoolers can be really good at excelling in socialization with other people because they have more interaction with speaking with people at the grocery stores versus a student who's stuck in a classroom has to raise their hand to speak and only has 20 to 40 minutes a day to speak to their peers openly.
I think you brought up a really interesting point. I think the core difference is how they perceive, how they control their own time. So freedom. When you're homeschool, of course, you're in your own home environment. You are much more flexible to learn at your own pace. Whereas when you're in a group, you sort of have to follow the lead of the teacher and the group. So I think the biggest difference is how they control their time and then how they perceive their own autonomy.
And if you look at the statistics, we can see that homeschooling, if done right, they excel in almost every subject compared to the public school students. Do you know why that may be happening?
Well, I don't have data, but my theory is that when you have a one-on-one interaction with the teacher, it's much more effective than being a group of 20 kids. So I think it all comes down to attention. And I'm just talking from my own personal experience. Like my daughter, we really spend a lot of time cultivating her interest, and she's my only student at home. So I'm able to dedicate a lot of my energy and resource. And I think testing is such a interesting, I think testing it's helpful, but I think a lot of time we're looking at, are they good at taking tests? Okay,
yes.
Get out of the way. But then I think testing, sometimes it's helpful to really see where they're at. And then it is true, so of course, me brought up in a traditional school system, I'm always wondering, am I doing my job? Will she be able to, if she wants to attend college, will she be able to take the SAT and stuff? So we took the test, and she indeed tested above grade level for language and mathematics. And I think it's just a freedom for her to explore at her own pace. Because if we come across something that's difficult for her, we're able to slow down, or we can skip ahead if something is particularly easy. From the way you ask questions and talking about homeschooling, I feel like it sounds like you might have some experience, or did you just do your research? You seem very knowledgeable about this.
Well, I have done this podcast quite a bit, and I'm an education junkie, I guess you can say, because it was my background for some time. I taught in the public schools. Growing up, I went to private school, so I know the discrepancies between private schools and public schools. And then 2019, 2020, the pandemic happened. We can see what happened with hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of parents transitioning from online learning to going to homeschooling, because what was happening was the public schools weren't equipped to teach online learning. Yes, they got an agreement with Zoom, and Zoom became a billion-dollar company, but the teachers weren't equipped. They didn't go to school to do online learning. They had to have the in-person, in-class interaction. So a lot of these teachers weren't even equipped during the pandemic. So many of the children were suffering. And one of the things I want to get into a discussion now is your business, because we can see the transition from the pandemic to today, where public schools are voluntarily having online learning and online schooling now, where it's not just, oh, we have to wait for another pandemic for it to happen. Online learning is becoming a thing. And so one of the things I'm adamant about is not staying stuck into what we have done all of life, because how we grew up is going to be very different than how our children are growing up. And if you're paying attention as a parent, you can see that. For example, we have iPads, right? Growing up, I didn't have iPads. I had a Game Boy when I was like 7, 8, or 9, or somewhere around there, but we didn't have all of that technology. We had a VHS or something along those lines. And we have come such a long way from technology. But my son, he's 3 right now, and he can use an iPad better than my mom, and my mom's 59. So we can just see how the children are adapting to this technology. So we do have to be aware that technology is going to be a thing of their generation. And we might be thinking in our mind, maybe we should bring it back old school, get the books, go to the library, do all those things. And all of these are great tools and resources for children. But it seems like there is a shift and a transition now with the younger generation to do online learning. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, because you do have this platform, and I wanted to, get a gauge of how effective it is, and how are you seeing it be effective?
So I think that the online platform is just one channel that students get to receive quality education. I think the core of a lot of education issue we see in public school is the inability to dedicate more resources. Granted, some districts have way more budget for each student, but I think the really issue is it's very hard for teacher to really cater to 20, 15 kids. Even 15 is too many, I think. Our classes are small, and I think rather than focusing on, and my company is online, that allows me to reach kids from all over the world, but I think the real goal is to create an inclusive, small, individualized learning. So every kid that comes to our class can feel recognized and seen and heard. And our teachers are really great at getting to know them. Well, I remember, I always like to ask my teachers, like, what is one way that you engage your student? And I know that some of my teacher, they say, well, I like to get to know them, because if I get to know them, then I can connect with them. And connection is a foundation of passing knowledge from one person to another. And that's essentially what we're doing. So I like the online platform. It's revolutionary, it's convenient. But I think what we're really focused on is creating this small, inclusive community where every children can cultivate their curiosity and creativity.
Would you say is each classroom that you have, or each, I guess you could say, session you have with your students, is it individualized by the different products that you're presenting, as in STEM, Mandarin, or Spanish? Or is it like a whole package of we're going to learn everything?
No, for language learning, it's very level specific. Like
Okay.
advanced students, it's really hard for them to be engaged in a beginner class. So our classes are divided by level, and we're trying to group them within a reasonable age range. So a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old would have nothing in common. So we're trying to group them by level and try to group them as close in age as possible. but all of our classes are capped at 8. It depends on their age. The younger group capped at 8, the older group capped at 12. So the real magic is to have this, the real magic is our teacher, of course, but then the chemistry between the students and the teacher. And, we really are trying to cultivate a very safe and positive learning environment. So our students come to class, feel challenged, but they also feel good about themselves when they leave
Yeah. Today, learning a second language is essential, but we can just see how many parents don't even give their children, I guess you can say, access to that. Of course, there's shows, there's programs like, what's that program that's very popular? Rosetta Stone is a very popular learning platform, but then it takes an individual to want to have to learn that too, because they have to be committed. Same thing with iPhones and Androids. They have apps like Duolingo, and all of these things are great resources, but there has to be some level of invigoration or passion for these children to want to learn, especially if it's extra, because we can look at the mindsets of Americans today. And this is not everyone. I don't want you to think it's everyone, but the mindset is, for example, if we're in America, we speak English versus Spanish or Mandarin or something along those lines. And we even have ignorant people who might hear someone say something in Spanish or in Mandarin and say, hey, this is America, let's speak English. So we have this level of maybe entitlement into some parents, and it stems into, or it dives into some of the children's lives too. So they even wonder, why should I have to learn a second language? And so my question is, what are the benefits to learning a second language today, especially if they just plan on staying in America where English is the dominant language?
So America is an immigrant country where we have people from all around the world. And a lot of our students, they might only speak English at home, but they might have a relative who live overseas or a relative that still speak their heritage language. And I think from culture perspective, it's so much more enriching to learn other culture, to travel, to go to a different parts of the world. Everyone can travel to the other side of the world every day. Having that language, when we're learning language, we're also learning about their cultural, their way of thinking. What I discover really interesting by being bilingual is the way I think about the problem. If I think it in Chinese and think it in English, I think it from different perspective. So from there, I want to talk about, just brain development perspective. I think having the ability to speak more language opens your not only child's brain development, but also open your way of thinking and looking at the world.
Very true. There is a study on that. They say a child who knows at least 2 languages by the age of 12 does better statistically on tests. So it's one of the things that they can measure. They can see if a child is doing better just by learning another language. And schools are doing pretty good with trying to teach them other languages. I know at some of the schools I worked in, Spanish was typically a staple crop, meaning it was always taught. And Mandarin was more for the magnet schools and some of the private schools. So it was being taught, but then I got to see the children interacting, and it's almost like they didn't really use it as much. There were maybe, if I had to give a percent, 3% of students who took it seriously, and then the rest were kind of like, yeah, it's just something I'm doing right now. They're just kind of pushing their way through. And they say if you don't use it, you lose it, with a language. So many of these students who have had lessons in an alternate language, they are going to have a more difficult time when they might be stepping back in it. Because what happens with a person who is habitually trying to learn a language and they don't do it, it becomes more challenging because they're like stop and go. It's very similar to if a person's trying to get in shape. So they're getting in shape and then they stop. It's very similar now to the mindset of New Year's resolutions. I'm going to start a New Year's resolution, and they have a New Year's resolution, and then they stop 3 months in. So we have this mindset of I'm going to do it for a short period of time because it's pleasurable, maybe because there's a passion or a bit of motivation there, or have some momentum. But there has to be something else that drives people to want to see it all the way through. And you brought up a great point of heritage, where maybe you want to speak to your grandparents, or you want to speak to someone from another country that might be a friend or a pal. And what I wanted to ask is, what is the way you motivate children to want to learn different things in different languages, and things that maybe might not be the standard for some of the grade level students that are going to be around them, or that they might be familiar with?
So I always come back to extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. And I think when we have a carrot dangling in front of our face and say, hey, if you do this, you're going to get a reward, that's very external, right? Extrinsic. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to cultivate this intrinsic motivation. So this is something that most of the kids come to our class, fortunately, already have the passion. So all we have to do is to just protect that little fire and cultivate it. We occasionally will have a student where their parents want them to attend. But I think being in a community, being with a teacher who really cares, because we're a community, we're social animals, and language is a very social thing. So earlier you brought up Rosetta Stone and Duolingo, all of these apps, and even today we have great AI tool to learn a language. And there's debate about AI replacing teachers, but I really wonder, can technology really replace human connection? And that's another topic. But so this
It's a
intrinsic
great topic.
motivation, yeah, I love thinking about this. I mean, we probably will find out, in the future, but right now it's the theory to think about how technology, AI plays a role in education. It's very intriguing, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about that quite a bit. And I've come to the conclusion that no matter how much we program a robot, technology, AI, they will never replace a human. Never. It's just because there are things that cannot be programmed, right? You can try to think of every situation, but then there could be something that just happens that is atypical, that someone might not have thought. Like a programmer say, wait, that would never happen. And sure enough, it happens. What do we do? I think we can even look at a situation where there's war and famine, right? We could see all the stuff happening around the world. We can have a computer that's programmed and they're going to give a very blanket answer of what needs to be done. But the reality is they're living tough lives, is challenging. And when you have connection with a person, it makes it easier for someone to want to wake up or to move the next day. We think of parents and purpose, where most parents, if they are having a hard time with their career and you ask them, what is their purpose? They're going to say, well, it's my child, my son or my daughter, whoever. It's not their job anymore. It becomes their child. And we have to take that away sometimes. And when we say, okay, well, this is good to have, but what about your work life? Like, what do you want to do? And where is your active service? And when we start to look at that, then that is basically what is fulfillment in life. It is being of service to someone or to something bigger than yourself. Because, there's the African proverb, if you want to go fast, or if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And it's not, we need a bunch of robots and a bunch of AI, walking with us. It's this idea of people and community and tribes. And when I think of children today, they have lost many of those connections of their parents, maybe of their grandparents, great grandparents. They're losing this value of family. And I bring this up quite a bit, where a child would put their parent in a nursing home before they put them in their own home. And this is a cultural thing, but then it's also a generational thing, because at one point they had children because they knew they were going to get old. Parents knew they were going to get older, and they wanted to, of course, keep the bloodline going. They wanted to have someone to take care of them or to take care of the land. But all of this is kind of up and gone now. People are living in high-rise apartments. Everyone is remote working, they're remote nomads. So we have moved in life very differently. But what I have found is that learning has been very static. We can look at normalized schools in 1850, around there. It's 1849, 1850, depending on where you're looking in Massachusetts. And the Board of Education was founded 1903. And so what happened with that idea of schooling is it remained very similar. And we can see what's happening in the government today where they're thinking about doing education reform. And they're thinking about just overhauling the whole system because America, we spend on the public school students the most per student than almost any other nation in the world, yet we have some of the lowest test scores. So we have to wonder if we're spending all of this money on children in the public schools, but they're not being as effective as other countries like New Zealand or Switzerland. What's going on with our education system? And then, of course, I want to kind of transition that into how you fill in the gap with your business.
That question. And I love that you sort of gave a very brief overview of this, the past 200 years, how our country has evolved in so many ways, but education has been stagnant. And I think, and also another point that was really interesting that you mentioned was the connection between different generations in the family, how we're a nuclear family where mom, dad, children, and then the grandparents are less involved in the grandchildren's lives. I remember when I was a little, we have, 3 generations living one home. And that's a very Chinese cultural thing where you sort of live with your grandparents and parents. But America is different. We have this nuclear family structure where everyone's taking care of themselves. I don't think that this is, I think this is a problem where everyone needs to be on board, because if we change the school, then we have to change the structure of the work. If we change the structure of parent schedule, if we change that, then we have to change how corporations run their business, right? And if we change that, we have to change the structure of capitalism. But, it sounds easy. Step 1, step 2, step 3. But there are forces bigger than all of us that are at play. And all the control we have is our unit, our family, our community, and perhaps our business. And these are the impact that we can contribute to the big picture. So I think quality education should not have this barrier of entry, but we have seen that with public school of different school districts. We have seen that with private school where, it costs a fortune to send your kids to a very great private school. Even college, there's a barrier of entry, and that's largely related to money. And we live in a capitalistic society where, this is a language that this is a currency we all agree on. We're trading in this society. But I do think that and we have to make the best of what we got. And I think, our public education is the best we have right now. And then we're going to make the most out of it. And my organization is there to support teachers, support public education. I know that there are a lot of great, and I'm pro public education. I hope that one day we will have, public school where teachers are well paid and families are happy and feel trusting when they send their children to school, and there's no life-threatening issue that they have to worry about, if you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But, until then, I think my organization, my goal is to provide quality education, and hopefully we can fill the gaps in between.
I think when it comes to different types of schooling, right? As you said, there's the public, they have the homeschooling, there's the private, and most of the time it is dependent on the parent to say, okay, you're going to this private school because I have money, or you're going to the public school because this is our district and we just follow in it. So fall into circumstance. They have magnet schools where things are lottery. So it's kind of like a mix of private and public. Those are nice generally. And then you have homeschooling where a parent's like, okay, I'm not going to send you to schools because it's a waste of time. And, I can look at so many students who have done homeschooling and I can say the pros and cons to it. So I think there's this pros and cons to each type of learning. And as a parent, you have to be able to look at your child and see where they are and what they need. For example, some children might have a liking for soccer. And maybe you are a football player. You are like an American football player, and you want them to be the next big thing, right? You want to be the next Tom Brady or something. And that's a nice ambition for you to have, but what do they want? Maybe you are really good at volleyball and you're like, okay, you're going to do volleyball because I did volleyball. And so we are presenting our life or our past on our children and not allowing them to explore and to figure out what they want. And one of the things I wanted to ask is, how do you help your students explore different things? Because I know we could be focused on the topics that you teach, but then there's also the pragmatic bit of education where it's like, where do you want to go? And let's see where that goes. Because in language learning, you might have a static thing of you say, hello, how are you? And then you have some conversation topics, but there is going to be maybe no perfect way to have a conversation with everybody if you don't get into this aspect of having free-flowing conversations rather than, okay, this is the common conversation that's going to happen with everyone. For example, Spanish. I was learning Spanish for quite some time in high school and then college. And then I had a Mexican girlfriend, and then she spoke Mexican Spanish and I was learning like American Spanish. Man, I did not know what they were saying. I was like, I thought I knew Spanish, but I guess I didn't. So it's this idea of being pragmatic with the learning language.
So your question is, how do we help them learn a skill that they can really use?
Right. Instead of it being just so formal, but more informal, because sometimes they're going to have those informal conversations where they might not know what a person is saying because it could be too friendly. And like a Spanish speaking country, for example, Puerto Rico, they speak
Different.
Spanish. Yeah. So it's different. So then I don't want to put everything in one basket, but how can, again, going back to the pragmatic bit, being able to be flexible and be able to adapt to the different types of Spanishes or different types of Mandarins or something along those lines.
So Mandarin and Spanish are quite different. I know that Mandarin is one type of Chinese, and then we also have Cantonese. So I think when we are conducting classes, we're trying to teach something very practical because like when I was in high school, I actually did learn Spanish. I don't remember anything besides from hola, adios. And then the problem is I was learning to pass a test. Whereas I think when we're learning a language, we have to learn, our goal is to teach them to be effective communicators in that language. If the goal is to teach them to pass tests, then the strategy will be very different than teaching them to be effective communicators. So and circle back to your point of how our state of education is very stagnant. We are still teaching to them to pass tests versus we're trying to cultivate what's unique in each one of them. I knew I wanted to be a teacher when I was 5 years old. But then when I was growing up, there were just so many voices from family, society. I deviated from what I really wanted to do and pursue something that looks good, for other people. And I think me as a parent and me as a teacher, what's important for me is how do I help them strengthen that inner voice? Because I think every kid is born curious and creative. Some come from family where they not only don't protect that fire, but they step on it. So I want to be, even though they're only spending 30 minutes, an hour with us every week, but I want these 30 minutes, an hour to be the highlight of their week.
I like everything that you said there, especially like they step on the fire. And it happens sometimes without our consent or without even our knowledge as parents, because maybe we have limits that we're dealing with, or we have issues that might have been in the past and we just kind of chalked it up to be normal.
We're dealing with our own trauma. And, in the process of parenting, hopefully we're working on these issues, but sometimes that gets the best of us. But I think the really important thing is just to be self-reflective when you're a parent and look at the mistake we have made, and hopefully we don't do the same mistake again.
As much as I would love to say that parents do a great job at getting personal development and leveling up, they don't. It's just that they just tack on all the burdens of the world and they keep on doing it. Where I do see a transition with more parents today than ever before getting help with themselves, mentors, coaches, guides, parenting groups. We have so many available resources for them where they're looking at themselves with a magnifying glass and they're saying, okay, let me pay attention. Just the other day, I forget what I said to my wife. I'll have to look at my phone. But basically, the idea or the concept was we have to understand that when children are growing up, they're learning to live in the world that is present today versus the world that we have lived in the past. So as a parent, we should learn to learn the world with them rather than just to be so stuck in our ways of what the world was. And it just offers more flexibility in allowing ourselves to not be so rigid. This is why I like pragmatism in teaching. There was a kindergarten teacher when I was doing my internship, and she was extremely pragmatic. Her classroom was chaotic, but it worked so beautifully. And I said, how in the world do you do this? And she's like, well, they are learning responsibilities. They're learning to communicate and things along these lines. And I speak with some adults today that are all done with high school or all done with college, and their level of communication is nil. So we can see that there's a lot of problems. And one of the things I love you said was become effective communicators. And to communicate is not just to speak or I'm speaking at you. It's to listen. It's to understand. And this is where I think that AI will never be able to have that level of effective communication that a human could have, because
ChatGPT is extremely positive, but almost to a point where he will agree with anything.
If you say something to ChatGPT, for example, ChatGPT, I want you to write up a plan for changing the education system, right? They're going to write up this whole plan. And if you say, this is a great plan, but I think there is an error here, the ChatGPT is programmed to say, I agree, there is an error there. So it's like you gave me a plan that had an error previously, and then I pointed out to you, and then now all of a sudden you're giving me the updated algorithm, right? There's a series of steps that they follow in the AI system, but in life you just have to know these things. And one of the things I love with like small learning, small classrooms is that you get to see the individual student, that you get to see what they need, how they are. It can get very clouded in big classrooms. I had classrooms up to 30 to 35 students growing or when I was teaching. And we had the 80% rule where you only had to have 80% of the class be able to pass. So what happens to the other 20%, right? They fall in the gaps. And I believe that's where parents will come in and they'll get tutors, they'll get mentors. They will seek out companies like yours to say, hey, my child is so great and so smart, but he needs some help.
Yeah, I agree. And back to, so when you were talking about the AI stuff, I think another part of all the hype is just there's a lot of money to be made in AI. I know AI company trying to bring that into the public school system. And I think that's another reason why we see so much of that hype. I don't know if I probably deviated from what you were saying.
Well, our conversation today has no flow. It's more just a general understanding of your company, how you help people. Of course, we talked a little bit about the education of what's happening in the world or what's happening in America primarily. But this idea of a parent can instill learning into their child, regardless of where they are presented to be or put in. So if they're in private schools, a parent could still be a prominent figure in that child's education. Public schools, same thing. Online learning, same thing. Like, so all of these things are resources for a parent. If you're a parent and you're listening to this, I encourage you to do some deep thinking of, where your child is today, because maybe they are getting A's in schools and things like that. And maybe they are in the public schools where testing is a big thing, where you might say, well, they are an A student and they are doing good, but maybe they're suffering other areas. Maybe they're not being more open. They're not taking risks. They're not communicating good.
Grades is very one-sided perspective of academic, how well they're performing academically. It's very much how well they are at taking tests. But there are other good aspects as well. And I think I always say that kids need to feel safe and connected to learn effectively. But I think parents also need to feel safe and have the space to slow down. I think nowadays everybody is moving so fast, including myself. And just having not many people have the space to sit down, enjoy a cup of coffee, or just having a conversation with other people. So this is what technology promised at the beginning. It has actually widened the gap between people. So we have become more isolated. And I'm hoping, here's what I hope for parents. I hope that they will slow down and take care of themselves, because when they're thriving, their kids will thrive.
Very true. And I loved our conversation from start to finish. We talked about so many wonderful things about your business to education. And what I would love for you to do now is for you to give us some final words, final thoughts, something you would like the audience to walk away from, or just to, be still with for a moment after this conversation is done or the podcast episode is done. And then, of course, please tell everyone how they can find you, learn about your business, and invest in their children and to support your business.
So I think that your audience who are listening to this episode are probably, I know we talk a lot about how parents needs to do better. We have to be better, parenting, have a better parenting scale. But I think your audience who are listening to this, you are doing the best you can at this moment with the resource, the time, and then you're carrying your own problem, own trauma, and your own childhood with you. And I just want the parents to understand that if you're listening, you are doing the best you can. And I understand what it feels like to feel like you're not doing enough. And whatever your situation is, you're absolutely doing the best you can at this moment. There's always room for improvement. But if you want to find quality online education for math, Spanish, Chinese, and STEM classes, you can find us at WonderSparkLearning.com. And my name is Jessica. I'm the owner of WonderSpark Learning.
Perfect. And I'm going to make it easy for everyone. All the links are right down below. And I don't know if you have any social links, but I'm going to put those there. People love checking out social media. So I'm going to put all the links that you have for me. And so I encourage everyone to check out what Jessica is doing and to not be afraid to just have a conversation, because a conversation like this can not only change your perspective, but it can also change the direction of where your child is going to be ending up in their life. So I do want to thank you, Jessica, for spending some time coming on and, of course, talking about your work today.
That was a great conversation.